child's clothes were carried away. A woman wiped away the blood from the drawn-out weapon thrust into his heart. A goddess sought to tend him, and a weeping woman came to lament at the gate of burial. He was brought back to life at the spring equinox. Of course, the early church tried to claim these similarities is that the devil had deceived people concerning the passion of Jesus, and then the devil had made the whole passion of Jesus similar, and they had made a similar thing for their gods. However, there is a much more convincing explanation. And the more convincing explanation requires us to go back a little bit again to look at some interesting historical points. Now, in my lecture in Sydney, I tried to look at the truth about Jesus from two particular angles. I tried to look at it from the angle of examining whether the biblical text could really act as an authentic source of information about the life of Jesus. And we showed that there are several problems with that. We showed in that lecture that there are several problems with it. The contradictions within the biblical text, also the presence of large numbers of other stories of the life of Jesus that did not agree with the one that is present in the Bible. And that we also showed that the present day biblical text is something that was chosen by one particular sect and one particular group and one particular mentality within Christianity. And these texts were chosen because it agreed with their idea. In fact, the gospel writers themselves confessed that why did we choose these events? Why do we choose these things? As Luke, for example, confesses to Theophilus, that many people have written accounts and many people have said different things. But I chose these things because it seemed good to me, and the reason why is because it testified to their concept that Jesus was the Son of God, and that the whole concept of Christ crucified being the essential gospel, Pauline Christianity, essentially. However, what we find is something very more interesting, which I didn't discuss in the former lecture, and this is something, one letter Q. Now, anyone who has studied a little bit about biblical scholarship will know and understand what Q is. Q actually is short for the German word Quell, and the German word Quell means source. A very interesting thing happened when some biblical scholars, Protestant biblical scholars, started examining the Gospels. They found that Matthew and Luke contained a lot of parallel information. In fact, a large number of sayings were almost identical and similar. Yet this information was not in Mark. Although they generally agree that Mark, in fact, is the oldest of the Gospels. So they tried to think, from where did Matthew and Luke get this information? Where were they getting this information? And they realized that Matthew and Luke must have had a common source. They must have had a common source, some bit of information, some tradition, some writings that they were both referring to. And the very interesting thing is that all the similarities between Matthew and Luke are all sayings of Jesus. This is important. It's important because there were no events described. There were no things about what Jesus did and where he went. Particularly in this common source document, there is nothing in the common source document about the crucifixion, the passion. And that, for a minute, for quite a while in biblical scholarship, it didn't mean anything. They didn't really think about it until they discovered a gospel according to Thomas. They discovered the Gospel of Thomas. That was a gospel that was used and has been used by the Egyptian Coptic Church for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And this Gospel of Thomas was also a gospel that is what they call a sayings gospel. In other words, all it contained were sayings. Jesus said this, and Jesus said that, and he said this, and he said that. Nothing about what he did, it's all about just what he said. Now that had absolutely mind-boggling and devastating implications. Because what it meant is there is a whole tradition in early Christianity to whom the death and crucifixion of Jesus meant nothing. It was not even considered to be important. What was important for them is what Jesus said and what Jesus taught. And he didn't say and didn't teach anything about the passion. He didn't say and teach anything about the crucifixion. He taught what I was talking about before. Haqiqullah, Haqiqul Ibad, the rights of God, the rights of the creation. How we should worship God, how we should treat one another. It was a sayings gospel. Now that, of course, calls into question the whole presumption that Christianity from day one was this religion that believed in a Christ crucified who had come to save humanity through his death. Rather, it seems clear that early Christians considered what Christ said and what he taught about how to live really important. Whether he died and was crucified or not was almost totally irrelevant. And that means that the whole idea of God becoming a man, the whole idea of a sacrifice for the sins of humanity, the whole idea of the resurrection is unnecessary. It is not relevant to what Jesus really said and what he taught. Yet that's the whole foundation of Pauline Christianity. And that's what we generally today call Christianity. Now, how did this come about? How did this come about? How did we get this fusion and confusion taking place? Well, to tell you the truth, it is almost impossible for us to come to a definite and definitive understanding how. However, as Muslims, we find the Quran gives us some tantalizing glimpses into how this took place. We find the Quran mention some things about Jesus, about the false concepts and lies that were attributed to him, and how these things came about. For example, the Quran it appeals to the Christian. It says to the Christians, "O people of the book, O Christians and Jews, don't exaggerate. Don't go over the bounds in your religion. Don't speak about God anything except the truth." So the first hint that we have is that exaggeration. Exaggeration. This is one of the ways that this change and this perversion and this corruption came about, through exaggeration. And we have another hint. When the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said to the Muslims, "Do not exaggerate in praising me as the Christians exaggerated in praising Jesus. I am Abdullah and I am Rasulullah. I am the worshipper of God and I am the messenger of God." So this is another clue. Don't exaggerate in praising me. So this is another clue that one of the ways this happens is an exaggeration in praising.